The internet is a fairly new thing in the grand scheme of life. In this guinea pig generation, there's no telling what the long-term effects of social media giving 3-year-olds iPads or the instant fame from YouTube videos will cause. In 2006, Bo Burham became an internet sensation with his debut song, My Whole Family, and the rest was history. There were a ton of other tracks that would drive his popularity, like New Math, I'm Boyo, Love Is, all of these before he had even turned 18. He'd go on to comedy festivals, a self-titled album, and of course, his first studio album, Words, Words, Words. I'm sure this hyperlight speed ascension to the top of the stand-up comedian community led to a lot of resentment for the young comedian. The Green Room with Paul Provenza is a good example of this. For the most part, these really famous comedians are kind of respectful. Ray Romano is good for a laugh every minute or so.
Yeah, I'm of the...
But there's definitely an air to you don't know what you're talking about, kid. Which, to be fair, to some degree, yeah, a 20-year-old doesn't have the most figured out in life. But also, usually a 20-year-old isn't being broadcasted onto the world with every thought they've had. Like, I get these are jokes or whatever, but there's something a little odd with the energy in it.
Do you think Bo's just healthy?
I think Bo's really healthy, yeah.
And he can be as funny as us fucked up. Are you damaged?
No, I always...
Come on, you gotta be.
No, I...
Also, Bo would later work with Judd Apatow, which turned into a canceled show, Yo Teach, that was used as a gag in Funny People. For a really famous comedian, his track record isn't exactly what you'd expect in movies and film. He has brief cameos in a bunch of comedies, like you get Bo Burnham of all people to be a random bartender in Hall Pass? I just wonder what it was like to enter a different space after being the center of attention in the stand-up comedy world, only to feel kind of like an afterthought in TV and film. Which maybe that's how he wanted it, who's to say? However, during his hiatus from stand-up, Bo Burnham went on to make his own film, 8th Grade, that aimed to depict an authentic portrayal of a teenager on the internet. Bo, of course, was known for his authenticity in comedy. From songs like Art is Dead, We Think We Know You, and Can't Handle This, there is a different feel to his comedy. It feels open and expressive. I mean, of course, these are still jokes, but there's a lot more introspection than one would expect from an internet comedian. This openness bled into his feature film as it is dealing with someone who broadcasts themselves online, but instead these aren't met with instant fame and success. This is an assumption, but I'd imagine there's a slight jealousy from Burnham. Like, don't get me wrong, the dude is set for life and good for him. However, there is so much that went into his big success that likely was a lot of stress to throw at someone before their brain was even fully developed. Around the release of 8th Grade, he opened up about his anxiety that led to him retiring from stand-up, but stayed in the comedy space, directing 2 specials for Gerard Carmichael and Chris Rock. Bo Burnham is a weird celebrity where a large part of the internet has grown up with him, and for a lot of people to feel seen when a very famous person opened up about problems that they have dealt with in their own lives. But this openness led to something completely different in his return to stand-up in his 2021 special, Inside.
Camera test.
Bo Burnham's stand-up special, if you even want to call it that, was announced a month before its release, which is great! The return of the legend! Like I mentioned, he's one of the most well-known internet-created celebrities. But without an audience, what exactly would a self-produced, directed, edited, and starring special have in store for the people? Even though in some ways this was a return to where it all started, it's certainly different from anything we've seen from Burnham. While it still includes a lot of what people have come to expect from Bo Burnham,
don't you know the world is built with blood and genocide and exploitation?
There's an overwhelming amount of lingering darkness throughout. It's simple things like the way he looks at the camera angrily throughout the experience, the constant cuts to the mundane editing process, and the inclusion of his lowest of lows during his time in quarantine. Sure, it was real, but in a very worrisome way, which I don't know, maybe that's the terms he wants to come back on, or maybe it morphed into this the longer quarantine went on. Because while yes, it's great that a lot of people felt seen by this, is this healthy for Bo Burnham? To doctor all of these thoughts down in the not so best of times, like, I completely relate to how crippling it must have been to feel like all the pieces were finally coming together, only to be knocked down by a global pandemic, shattering your plans. That was me. but I don't exactly want to relive thinking about that over and over. And not only that, but having to edit that all together and to second guess yourself on if you sound like a whiny dude with first world problems. A lot of the editing process moments felt like an admission to how exhausting this process can be. Like, I second guess myself when I talk about movie posters, so I can't imagine being abundantly open about a lot of your feelings going over well in that process. Maybe it was gratifying. In a lot of ways, to me, the special felt like a mix of I'm the monster you created and tons of openness about the toils of creating art. I'm just worried for the guy. I just don't know the effects of going through all this stuff and the constant second guessing if you should even put this out. But maybe this is exactly what people needed. Someone brave enough to show all of the bad self-loathing that comes with churning out content. And hopefully this will allow people to put down a couple of their guards. But at the same time, I can't stop circling back to the fraught "you made this" vibe that feels very pointed to the internet. Just the image of him staring at his younger self gives me a sense of him remembering a time where he wasn't famous for half of his life, or the idea of wondering if this was all worth it, or if he would do it differently if he went back. But again, this is what it's like for him in this era. For everyone to constantly overanalyze and think about every action that a human being does and decide if you can still support them, but you don't know the first thing about them. He even alludes to this with a lot of the imagery at the end of the special. He's done with the show only to be locked out, still on stage, with tons of people laughing at him. You can try to escape, but you're going to be presented in front of the public forever now. I don't know if it was the fans, producers, or himself that are giving a constant reminder to go back to the grind of the content machine even if he's not ready. And I'm sure with so much time away from stand-up, there's probably a lot of feeling like you missed out on a ton of material, feeling out of rhythm, or wondering if people will even care about your return. This seems like something Burnham doesn't feel as much in service to his audience as it does as a means of understanding an individual through a rougher part of his artistic process. But again, I know nothing about him, and regardless of how cluttered or messy this project is, that's the beautiful thing about art. It doesn't need to be understood or explained. It just needs to exist. Thanks, Bo.
So long, goodbye. I'll see you when I see you.